12 Golden Age actors who were shockingly fat. The stars of Hollywood's Golden Age were larger than life on screen, and for many of them, that became literally true as the years passed. While their classic films captured them in their prime, these beloved actors underwent dramatic physical transformations that many fans never fully realized. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the surprising weight struggles of some of cinema's greatest talents. Those matinee idols and character actors you admired on screen. By their later years, many had ballooned to sizes that would shock modern audiences accustomed to seeing them only in their most famous roles. This isn't about minor weight fluctuations. We're talking about sex symbols who became unrecognizable, leading men who doubled their size, and talented performers whose growing girth both defined and limited their legendary careers. Get comfortable. We're about to reveal the dramatic physical transformations that these 12 Golden Age stars experienced, showing you sides of your favorite actors that classic film montages rarely include.
Father died when I was 15.
1. Orson Welles. From Citizen Kane to Citizen Cake. When 25-year-old Orson Welles exploded onto the scene with Citizen Kane, he wasn't just intellectually impressive, he was a physical specimen. Standing 6 feet 1 inch with chiseled features and piercing eyes, young Welles had the looks of a leading man packaged with the mind of a genius. Fast forward 30 years, and you'd need a wide-angle lens just to get him in frame. The warning signs showed up early. Even during his Mercury Theater days, colleagues noticed his appetite was as outsized as his talent. Orson didn't eat meals, he attacked them, one actor recalled. The man could demolish a steak dinner, meant for 3 people without blinking, then ask what was for dessert. During the 1950s, the scale started tipping faster than movie attendance. By Touch of Evil in 1958, his custom-made detective costume needed weekly alterations, and not to make it smaller. The film's famous opening tracking shot, they had to reshoot it multiple times because Welles got winded trying to keep pace with the camera. The 1960s brought what Hollywood insiders dubbed the Welles expansion, a period when his body grew faster than his list of directing projects. His sharp jawline disappeared into cascading folds of flesh. Directors abandoned full-body shots in favor of close-ups that hid his straining waistbands. Nothing captures his transformation better than those Paul Masson wine commercials from the late 1970s. There sits Welles, tipping the scales at well over 300 pounds, his face practically spherical, gravely intoning, "We will sell no wine before it's time." The ads became famous not for the wine, but for the shock of seeing what had happened to the boy wonder of American cinema. The weight didn't just change his appearance, it crippled his career. Insurance companies classified him as high risk. Custom wardrobe budgets doubled. Directors' chairs needed reinforcement. One producer put it bluntly, "We had to rebuild part of the set just so he could fit through the doorways." Peter Bogdanovich once caught Welles staring at a Citizen Kane publicity photo. Pointing to his younger self, Welles said quietly, "That's me, trapped in here," while gesturing to his enormous frame. The genius who conquered Hollywood at 25 had become a prisoner of his own appetite. He went from Greek god to Greek buffet. The man who created Citizen Kane couldn't create enough willpower to push away from the table, and his final years became a sad coda to what should have been cinema's greatest career.
Catherine Cornell, and I was in Eagle Rampant with Tallulah Bankhead.
2. Marlon Brando. From streetcar to streetwide. If Hollywood ever sculpted physical perfection, it was the young Marlon Brando. When he tore that sweaty t-shirt in A Streetcar Named Desire, revealing a torso that looked chiseled by Michelangelo himself, America collectively gasped. Women swooned in theater aisles. Men secretly added push-ups to their daily routine. This wasn't just another handsome face. This was raw animal magnetism wrapped in human skin. This was a man who looked like he could bench press a Cadillac while reciting Shakespeare. Throughout the 1950s, Brando's physical magnificence remained his calling card. Whether straddling a motorcycle in The Wild One or brooding through On the Waterfront, his powerful build dominated every frame. He wasn't just the best actor of his generation, he was the best-looking one too. Then came the fall, and what a massive fall it was. The first signs appeared during Mutiny on the Bounty, 1962. Crew members noticed his formerly flat stomach now protruded over his waistband. More alarming was his between-takes behavior. He'd consume enormous meals, sometimes eating continuously for hours. Costume designers started building extra room into his wardrobe, secretly letting out seams weekly. By the time The Godfather began shooting in 1971, Brando had expanded significantly, but in a stroke of genius, they incorporated his girth into the character. Those cotton balls puffing out Don Corleone's cheeks weren't the only padding in that performance. That impressive gut was 100% Brando. Director Francis Ford Coppola just pretended it was character development. Then came Apocalypse Now, and the situation went nuclear. When Brando arrived in the Philippines, Coppola nearly had a heart attack. The script described a lean Green Beret colonel. What showed up was a man so enormous he made the jungle look small. Coppola's emergency solution? Film Brando in near darkness. Those iconic scenes where Colonel Kurtz lurks in shadow, that wasn't artistic vision, that was damage control. By the 1980s, Brando had ballooned to a reported 350 to 400 pounds. His final film appearances show a man barely recognizable as the sex god of the 1950s. His face bloated, his neck swallowed by his shoulders, his body straining against clothing that resembled circus tents. The stories from The Island of Dr. Moreau set have become Hollywood legend. Brando allegedly demanded ice cream be available at all times, wore muumuus between takes, and had assistants bring him snacks during filming. Crew members found half-eaten sandwiches hidden in set furniture after scenes. One set piece reportedly had to be rebuilt because the original doorway couldn't accommodate his girth. By the time Coppola considered him for a small role in The Freshman, he jokingly budgeted for one Brando, plus 50% for Brando's mass. The joke wasn't far from the truth. He didn't just devour scenes, he devoured the catering truck. The man once hailed as the definition of masculine beauty spent his final years barely able to walk across a room, breathing heavily from the effort of carrying his own massive frame.
Wrong things. Talking something you can't do judiciously unless you keep in practice.
3. Sidney Greenstreet, the villain who grew with his legend. Unlike Wells and Brando, Sidney Greenstreet never suffered the tragedy of transformation. He didn't lose a perfect physique to appetite. From the moment he waddled onto the Hollywood scene in 1941's The Maltese Falcon, Greenstreet was already enormous, and that was precisely his power. Making his film debut at age 61 after decades on stage, Greenstreet stood 5 feet 11 inches and carried well over 300 pounds on his frame. Director John Huston didn't try hiding this bulk, he weaponized it. As Casper Gutman, literally nicknamed the Fat Man, Greenstreet turned his size into menace. There was something unsettling about a man that large moving with such unexpected grace. What made Greenstreet remarkable was how he elevated obesity to elegance. While other heavy actors seemed apologetic about their size, Greenstreet wore his like a custom tuxedo, which in fact he always did. Those immaculate white suits in Casablanca weren't just fashion statements. They were architectural achievements that somehow made 300-plus pounds look sophisticated. The contrast between his enormous body and his delicate, almost dainty hand movements created an unsettling screen presence that directors exploited perfectly. Here was a villain whose physical appetite hinted at other, darker hungers. Behind the scenes, Greenstreet's size created logistical nightmares. Walking from his dressing room to the set left him winded. Standing for more than a few minutes caused intense pain. His suits required 3 times the standard fabric allotment, each one a minor engineering miracle designed to make his massive girth appear commanding rather than comical. Health problems inevitably followed. Diabetes ravaged his system. Kidney issues plagued him. His joints buckled under his weight, yet he rarely complained, maintaining professionalism despite physical challenges that would have sidelined lesser actors. The toll eventually became too great. His film career lasted just 8 years, 24 films between 1941 and 1949, before health issues forced his retirement. He died in 1954 at age 74, his body finally surrendering to decades of supporting his enormous frame. He didn't need a costume, he was the presence. In Greenstreet's case, his size wasn't a liability, but his defining feature, the physical manifestation of the larger-than-life villains that made him immortal on screen.
I don't wish to remain in service any longer, sir. I want to make something of myself. I would like to stand on my own 2 feet.
4. Charles Laughton, the genius trapped in fat. Charles Laughton possessed one of cinema's greatest minds and most expressive faces. His performances in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Witness for the Prosecution, and Mutiny on the Bounty revealed talent that transcended conventional boundaries. Yet throughout his career, one factor consistently limited his opportunities: his substantial weight. Unlike stars who gradually expanded, Lawton struggled with obesity from day one. Standing 5 feet 10 inches, he fluctuated between 230 and 280 pounds throughout his adult life. His round face, prominent double chin, and corpulent body became instantly recognizable to moviegoers, features that directors either had to work around or incorporate into the story. The limitations became apparent early. Despite classical training and extraordinary skill, Lawton was never considered for romantic leads or conventional heroes. Instead, he was channeled into playing grotesques, villains, or eccentrics, characters where his size made dramatic sense. His breakthrough as Henry VIII in The Private Life of Henry VIII, 1933, worked perfectly because the historical king was famously corpulent. Lawton's size became an asset rather than a liability, allowing him to physically embody the gluttonous monarch. His performance won an Academy Award, but further typecast him as the talented fat man. What makes Lawton's story particularly poignant is how aware he was of his limitation. In private, he expressed frustration at watching lesser talents land roles he could never touch simply because they had conventional physiques. "The camera may not add 10 pounds, he once remarked, but the casting director certainly does. He would sometimes crash diet before productions, losing 30 or 40 pounds through sheer willpower, only to regain the weight during filming as stress drove him back to food. This yo-yo pattern damaged his health while never quite changing his casting prospects. Directors who worked with Lawton noted his complicated relationship with his body. He often insisted on scenes that directly acknowledged his size rather than pretending it didn't exist. The famous bathtub scene in Henry VIII wasn't in the original script. Lawton suggested it as a way to confront audiences with his physical reality. Despite these limitations, Lawton carved out one of cinema's most distinguished careers, but one can't help wondering what additional dimensions might have been available had he possessed a different physique. Would we have seen Lawton as a subtle romantic lead, as a conventional hero? The possibilities remain tantalizingly unknown. His talent was enormous, and so was everything else. In Lawton's case, his brilliant mind operated from within a body that the image-conscious film industry never quite knew how to fully utilize.
My name is Smith.
Smith, I'm glad to know you, Mr. Smith.
I'd like you to bake me a cake with a letter S on it.
S?
Yes.
5. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, When Weight Becomes a Punchline. Roscoe Arbuckle's story represents the most direct connection between weight and career in Hollywood history. From the beginning, his size wasn't just a characteristic, it literally became his professional name, Fatty Arbuckle. Standing 5 feet 10 inches and weighing between 250 and 300 pounds, Arbuckle was one of silent cinema's first superstars. His weight became central to his comedy. The surprising agility with which he moved his large frame created an inherently funny visual contradiction. Audiences roared seeing this massive man execute perfect pratfalls and delicate physical comedy that would challenge performers half his size. Unlike many heavy actors who resented their weight, Arbuckle initially embraced his girth as his meal ticket. His films frequently featured gags highlighting his size, getting stuck in doorways, breaking furniture, or creating havoc simply by moving through a scene. In an era when obesity was relatively rare, Arbuckle's bulk made him instantly recognizable. Paramount Pictures recognized his commercial value, signing him to an unprecedented $3 million contract in 1919, roughly $46 million in today's money. Arbuckle had turned his weight into gold, becoming one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world. But his size exacted a heavy physical toll. The demanding stunts he performed despite his weight led to chronic pain and health problems. More insidiously, his distinctive appearance made him an easy target when scandal struck. When Arbuckle was falsely accused in the death of actress Virginia Rappe in 1921, his weight became the prosecution's visual evidence. Newspapers published vicious cartoons showing him as a gluttonous monster, with headlines screaming about how he had crushed the young woman, an accusation with no basis in fact, but made plausible to the public because of his size. Though fully exonerated after 3 trials, the damage was done. His weight, once his greatest asset, had been weaponized against him. His films were banned, his contract canceled, and his name became synonymous with scandal rather than comedy. They made fun of it until it destroyed him. Arbuckle's tragedy reveals how quickly physical characteristics that bring fame can become liabilities when public perception shifts. The same audience that laughed with him quickly turned to laughing at him, then condemning him when given permission by sensationalist media.
There in Radioland, this is Hannibal Day.
6. Victor Buono, the man who joked his way to an early grave. In the 1960s and 70s, Victor Buono carved out a unique niche in Hollywood, the cultured, eloquent fat villain. With his imposing size, melodious voice, and talent for delivering sardonic dialogue, he became the go-to actor when scripts called for intellectually intimidating yet physically repulsive characters. His breakthrough came in 1962's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, playing manipulative pianist Edwin Flagg opposite Bette Davis. Though already substantially overweight at around 260 pounds, Buono was still mobile enough to handle the physical demands of the role. His performance earned an Academy Award nomination and launched a busy career. As years passed, however, Buono's weight increased dramatically. By the 1970s, he reportedly approached 400 pounds, a dangerous amount for his 6'3" frame. This massive size limited his roles, increasingly typecasting him as grotesque villains or comic relief characters where his weight became a punchline. His role as King Tut in the campy Batman television series exemplified this problem. The character's excessive appetite and corpulent appearance became running gags. Rather than fighting this typecasting, Buono leaned into it, often writing his own comedy routines about being overweight and performing them on variety shows. In interviews, Buono developed a standard repertoire of self-deprecating jokes. "I don't get paid by the pound, but it helps," he'd quip to talk show hosts. Asked about dieting, "I've lost enough weight to create 5 normal-sized people and gained it all back with friends." The jovial public persona masked a complicated private relationship with his body. Friends reported that Buono recognized his weight had created a distinctive professional niche while simultaneously destroying his health. He'd occasionally attempt diets, losing 50 or 60 pounds, before reverting to habitual overeating. Health consequences mounted in the 1970s. Heart problems, breathing difficulties, and mobility issues became increasingly apparent. Basic tasks like climbing stairs or walking across a set became challenging. Directors scheduled his scenes carefully, aware he tired quickly and couldn't stand for extended periods. Despite these obvious warning signs, Buono continued his unhealthy lifestyle. His final years brought increasing isolation as his mobility decreased further. On January 1, 1982, Victor Buono suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Apple Valley, California. He was just 43 years old. He joked about it, but it killed him at 43. Buono's story shows how humor can serve as both coping mechanism and shield against confronting serious health issues, until the body delivers its final punchline.
Was I in here last night and did I spend a $20 bill?
Yeah.
Oh boy, what a load that is off my mind.
7. W.C. Fields, the bloated comedian with a drinking problem. W.C. Fields created a comic persona so perfectly aligned with his physical appearance that separating the man from the character becomes nearly impossible. With his bulbous nose, rotund midsection, and perpetually dyspeptic expression, Fields looked exactly like what he portrayed, a heavy-drinking misanthrope barely containing his irritation with humanity. What audiences didn't realize was how much Fields' distinctive appearance resulted from serious health problems connected to his lifestyle. Fields wasn't simply fat, he was suffering from the compounding effects of alcoholism, poor diet, and zero exercise, creating his characteristic bloated appearance. His drinking was legendary, even by Hollywood's permissive standards. He reportedly consumed up to 2 quarts of gin daily, starting each morning with a martini and rarely going more than an hour without alcohol. This massive consumption caused severe liver damage, resulting in the distended abdomen that became part of his silhouette. The bloating that characterized Fields' appearance wasn't simple fat, it was often edema, the abnormal fluid accumulation caused by liver and kidney dysfunction. His puffy face, swollen hands, and protruding belly were symptoms of serious medical conditions, not just dietary excess. Beyond alcohol, Fields maintained a terrible diet. He avoided vegetables and whole foods, preferring heavy dishes loaded with butter and cream. Between meals, he snacked constantly on candies and sweets, feeding a notorious sweet tooth that contributed to developing diabetes. This combination created a physical appearance that became Fields' trademark, but also hastened his decline. By the 1940s, his health was in serious trouble. His liver was severely damaged, his circulation poor, and he suffered chronic digestive issues that made eating painful. The cruel irony? Fields was trapped by audience expectations. His physical appearance had become integral to his brand. Viewers expected to see the red-nosed, rotund comedian they'd grown to love. Maintaining that appearance meant continuing the very behaviors killing him. During filming of My Little Chickadee in 1940, Fields was so ill he could only work for short periods before needing rest. His bloated appearance, while perfect for the character, represented serious medical distress. Co-star Mae West later remarked that Fields looked like a man who'd already died but hadn't been informed yet. Fields' final years brought increasing health crises as his liver continued failing. Hospital stays became frequent. He developed pneumonia and respiratory problems, exacerbated by his compromised immune system. On Christmas Day, 1946, W.C. Fields died from an alcohol-related gastrointestinal hemorrhage. He was 66 but looked much older. He wasn't just drunk, he was inflamed. Behind the comic persona was a man being destroyed from the inside out, a destruction that audiences mistook for comedy.
Now listen, don't start pushing me around.
Now, don't get hard. I'm not as soft as I look.
Oh, you think so?
8. Edward Arnold, the man who played power because he looked the part. Edward Arnold's career reveals Hollywood typecasting at its most literal. From the 1930s through the 1950s, Arnold appeared in over 150 films, almost exclusively playing wealthy, powerful men, business tycoons, political bosses, and authority figures. This consistent casting wasn't just due to his commanding voice, it directly connected to his substantial physical size. Standing 5 feet 11 inches and weighing over 300 pounds throughout most of his career, Arnold possessed a physical presence that instantly communicated authority and excess. His broad shoulders, substantial girth, and imposing stature created immediate visual shorthand for the characters he typically portrayed, men who consumed more than their fair share of the world's resources and power. Directors recognized that Arnold's size created instant characterization before he spoke a single line. When cast as corrupt businessmen in Meet John Doe or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, his physical abundance became a visual metaphor for greed. In visual storytelling, this physical typecasting proved remarkably effective. What's fascinating about Arnold's case is how his weight became inseparable from his professional identity. Unlike actors who struggled against weight-based typecasting, Arnold leaned into it completely. He wasn't being cast despite his weight, he was being cast because of it. This typecasting offered practical advantages. While leading men maintained strict diets and exercise regimens, Arnold faced no such pressures. His weight wasn't just accepted, it was required for the roles he played. This freedom from the scale's tyranny might seem enviable, but it came with significant health costs. By the late 1940s, Arnold was experiencing serious weight-related health issues. Heart problems, high blood pressure, and breathing difficulties became increasingly apparent. Walking even short distances became challenging, and he often required rest periods between scenes. The saddest aspect of Arnold's situation was how completely his physical appearance defined his career opportunities. Despite considerable acting range, he rarely received opportunities outside his established type. The few times he played against type, in more sympathetic or nuanced roles, critics seemed surprised that the fat villain could deliver sensitive performances. Arnold died in 1956 at age 66 from cerebral hemorrhage, likely connected to long-term hypertension caused by his weight. His career had been successful by any standard: consistent work, good pay, memorable roles, but also severely limited by the physical characteristics that had made that success possible. He was the go-to for greedy because he looked the part. In Arnold's case, his size wasn't just a physical attribute, but the defining feature of a career built on playing men whose appetites for food, money, and power exceeded all reasonable bounds.
He said that I was back in good shape, so there's no reason to curtail anybody.
9. Jackie Gleason, the great one's great size. Though Jackie Gleason straddled the line between Hollywood's golden age and television, his weight struggles exemplify the complex relationship between size and stardom that defined many careers from this era. When Gleason first gained national attention in the early 1950s with The Honeymooners, he was already substantially overweight, standing 5 feet 10 inches and weighing approximately 240 pounds. But as his fame increased, so did his waistline. By the mid-1950s, at the height of the show's popularity, Gleason had ballooned to nearly 330 pounds. What made Gleason unique was how completely he integrated his size into his persona. His character Ralph Cramden was defined not just by his blue-collar job and quick temper, but by his substantial girth. The comedy often derived from the contrast between Ralph's physical hugeness and his cramped apartment, modest income, and petite wife Alice. Gleason's famous catchphrase, "How sweet it is," took on additional meaning when viewed alongside his legendary appetite. Dinner typically meant a massive steak, multiple side dishes, bread courses, and dessert, all accompanied by copious amounts of scotch. This wasn't occasional indulgence, but a daily routine. Between meals, he smoked up to 5 packs of cigarettes daily and rarely engaged in any physical activity more strenuous than lifting a glass. The combination of excessive calories, alcohol, and sedentary behavior created perfect conditions for weight gain. By the 1960s, Gleason's health began showing strain from this lifestyle. He developed heart problems and diabetes directly related to his weight. His mobility decreased noticeably. While early Honeymooners episodes featured physical comedy requiring considerable movement, his later work increasingly positioned him in stationary settings. What's particularly striking was Gleason's refusal to acknowledge the health implications of his size. When doctors warned about his lifestyle dangers, he famously responded, "I'll go when I'm good and ready." This defiance characterized his approach. He refused to diet or modify his eating habits in any meaningful way. The toll became increasingly visible in the 1970s. His breathing grew labored during simple conversations. He developed a wheezing quality that hadn't existed in his younger years. Walking any distance became visibly challenging, yet he maintained his public image as the jovial big man living life on his own terms. Reality eventually caught up with Gleason's bravado. In 1986, he was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer, a condition possibly connected to decades of poor diet. He died on June 24, 1987, at age 71, having survived longer than many medical professionals predicted given his weight and lifestyle, but still shortened by his excesses. He played big because he lived big. Gleason's story shows how completely a performer can embrace physical characteristics as part of their brand, even when those very characteristics are silently killing them.
I'd give him what I gave Baker.
Don't I?
10. Laird Cregar, the tragic crash diet that killed a rising star. Perhaps the most heartbreaking weight-related Hollywood story belongs to Laird Cregar, a tremendously talented actor whose desperate attempt to transform his body cost him his life at just 28 years old. When Cregar first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1940s, he was already a big man, standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing over 300 pounds. Despite his youth, he was immediately typecast as villains and mature character roles due to his size and distinctive deep voice. Films like Blood and Sand and This Gun for Hire showcased his ability to project menace and authority beyond his years. His breakthrough came with The Lodger, 1944, a performance demonstrating remarkable range and intensity. Critics took notice, and suddenly Cregar seemed poised for major stardom. There was just one problem: his weight. Studio executives made it clear that while Cregar's talent was undeniable, his enormous size limited available roles. If he wanted to become a true leading man, with all the fame and fortune that entailed, he needed to dramatically transform his body. Driven by ambition and insecurity, Cregar embarked on one of the most extreme crash diets in Hollywood history. In less than a year, he lost over 100 pounds through a combination of near starvation, amphetamines, and exhaustive exercise. The transformation was dramatic. Publicity photos show a gaunt, almost unrecognizable version of the formerly robust actor. The crash diet achieved its intended purpose. Cregar was cast in his first true leading man role in Hangover Square, 1945, playing a tortured composer. On screen, he appeared dramatically different. His once round face now angular and hollow, his frame almost slender in tailored costumes. But the methods used proved catastrophic. The extreme stress on his body, particularly his heart, created a medical crisis. Just 2 weeks after completing Hangover Square, Cregar suffered a heart attack following a stomach operation related to his weight loss. He died shortly thereafter, never seeing the release of the film meant to launch his new career. The cruel postscript to this tragedy? Hangover Square received excellent reviews, with critics specifically praising Cregar's performance and appearance. The transformation that killed him would likely have achieved exactly what he hoped, transitioning to more prestigious roles. He tried to get thin for Hollywood, and it killed him. Kriegar's story represents the dark extreme of an industry that prizes appearance above all else, sometimes with fatal consequences.
Will you take your clammy hand off my chair? You have the touch of a love...
11. Monty Woolley. When weight becomes immobility. Monty Woolley created one of cinema's most memorable curmudgeons in The Man Who Came to Dinner, 1942, playing acerbic critic Sheridan Whiteside with such conviction that the role defined his career. What audiences didn't realize was how Woolley's increasingly limited mobility, caused by his substantial weight, shaped the roles available to him. When Woolley first gained Broadway prominence in the late 1930s, he was already a heavy man in his late 50s. By the time Hollywood called in the early 1940s, he had developed his trademark appearance, rotund body, walking cane, and bushy beard partially obscuring his double chin. What began as a distinguishing characteristic evolved into a serious health issue. Throughout the 1940s, Woolley's weight continued increasing, eventually restricting his movement to the point that it affected production schedules and role selection. Directors increasingly cast him in parts requiring minimal movement, characters who spent most of their screen time seated or stationary. The Man Who Came to Dinner inadvertently created the perfect vehicle for Woolley's condition. His character Whiteside spends most of the film confined to a wheelchair after falling on ice, allowing Woolley to perform while seated. This wasn't merely convenient staging. By this point, standing for extended periods caused him considerable pain. As the 1940s progressed into the early 1950s, Woolley's mobility decreased further. On the set of As Young as You Feel, 1951, crew members reported he could barely walk between takes, requiring assistance moving from his dressing room to the set. His breathing had become labored, marked by wheezing and frequent pauses during simple conversations. What makes Woolley's case particularly noteworthy is how his weight-related immobility actually shaped narrative decisions. Scripts were rewritten to accommodate his limited mobility, with explanations inserted justifying why his character remained seated. In Holy Matrimony, 1943, his character is portrayed as eccentric and reclusive, providing an in-story reason for minimal movement. By the end of his career, Woolley's health had deteriorated to where even seated performances became challenging. His final film appearance in Colonel Effingham's Raid, 1946, shows a man visibly struggling with basic functions, his breathing labored, his movements minimal, and clearly painful. Woolley died in 1963 at age 74, having effectively retired from film for over a decade due to health issues. His career, while successful, had been increasingly constrained by physical limitations imposed by his weight. A body that had once been merely heavy had become a prison limiting both professional opportunities and quality of life. He brought the house down, mostly because he couldn't get up from the chair. Woolley's story shows how weight can progress from a distinguishing characteristic to a serious disability that reshapes not just an actor's career, but the very stories that can be told about the characters they play.
It's only right, for there is among us Mary.
12. Raymond Burr, the immobile defender of justice. Raymond Burr created two of television's most iconic characters, the brilliant defense attorney Perry Mason and the wheelchair-using detective Robert Ironside. What most viewers didn't realize was how Burr's increasing weight problems influenced these characters' development, particularly in his later years. When Burr first assumed the role of Perry Mason in 1957, he was already substantial, standing 6 feet 2 inches and weighing approximately 210 pounds, heavy but not unusually so for a man of his height. His physical presence suited Mason perfectly, lending gravitas and authority to courtroom scenes. However, as the original series progressed through 9 seasons, Burr's weight increased significantly. By the final season in 1966, he had gained at least 70 additional pounds, bringing his weight to around 280 to 300 pounds. This gain was visible despite costumers' best efforts with increasingly structured suits. The weight gain had practical production implications. Courtroom scenes that once showed Mason actively moving around now increasingly positioned him behind tables or seated at the defense bench. The character's physical dynamism decreased noticeably in later seasons, with fewer instances of Mason rushing to solve cases personally. When Burr returned in Ironside in 1967, the character's wheelchair conveniently addressed his mobility issues. Playing a detective paralyzed by a sniper's bullet allowed Burr to perform while seated, minimizing the strain of carrying his substantial weight. What makes Burr's case particularly interesting is how his weight continued increasing even after these accommodations. By the mid-1970s, near the end of Ironside, Burr reportedly approached 350 pounds, dangerous even for someone of his substantial height and naturally large frame. This continuing weight gain created additional production challenges. Episodes had to be structured to minimize Burr's movement, not just because of his character's disability, but because of the actor's limited mobility. Scenes were rewritten to bring information to Ironside, rather than having him travel to obtain it, a narrative choice driven by practical necessity, rather than storytelling preferences. When Burr returned as Perry Mason in television movies beginning in 1985, the scripts were deliberately structured to accommodate his size. Unlike the original series, which frequently showed Mason actively investigating, the revival films positioned him more as a strategist, with legwork handled by other characters. Directors of these later projects reported making significant accommodations for Burr's condition. Shooting schedules were arranged to minimize his time on set, with his scenes grouped together to allow rest periods. Camera angles were carefully chosen to minimize his size's appearance, often filming from the chest up. Burr died in 1993 at age 76 from kidney cancer, but his health had been compromised for years by weight-related issues, including diabetes and heart problems. Throughout his later career, he maintained a punishing work schedule despite these challenges, often pushing himself to physical limits that concerned colleagues. He was the law, but by the end, he couldn't stand up for it. Burr's story illustrates how a talented actor can continue working and creating beloved characters while struggling with serious weight-related health issues, but only through increasingly elaborate accommodations that reshape the nature of the stories being told.